What would you do if you lost your driver's license and privileges to drive around? How would you get to work, make it to appointments, or transport your kids to school or other events? Vermont's public transportation system may be getting a little bit better than it used to be, but few would argue that it's just as easy to get around by a bus or train as it is by a car, much less commute to a job. For people who have to drive to work, and most of us do, having a car and a license to drive is a necessity, unless you have someone you can carpool with, which can introduce its own set of inconveniences. Here at GNAT, we receive daily reports from the state police on their arrests and situations they're involved with, and it's a rare day when there isn't at least one report filed from somewhere around the state where a driver is stopped and their driver's license turns out to be already criminally suspended or invalid for some reason. Clearly, many Vermonters who have lost their privilege to drive for a period of time have made a calculation that the need to be able to drive for whatever reason outweighs the risk of being caught again and having a larger fine imposed along with more penalty points on a license, and the license then suspended for an even longer period of time, compounding the dilemma facing those now former motorists. Is the situation something of a vicious circle or a catch-22? Is there a middle ground where motorists who make mistakes, like driving while under the influence of drugs or alcohol, could still be able to drive in limited circumstances, such as commuting to work, but not whenever they chose to? We asked Bennington County State's Attorney Erica Marthage what she thought about that and possible alternatives.
I think one of the things we could be looking at would be some type of provisional driver's license that's been looked at before. I think some other options would be looking at other ignition interlock devices, which would be more affordable than what they currently are, or are provided in only certain situations based on where you live and where you work. I think that the concern, of course, the fear is that folks are just going to get these work licenses just so that they can continue to drive to the bar. So we obviously want to control that because DUI is a serious offense, and sometimes someone gets a DUI 1 and it results in the death of someone, and those are the more tragic ones that we're trying to avoid. So, but I think common sense needs to be kind of involved in whatever plan we come up with.
Now, is Vermont typical in the way we do this, or are we sort of, in the minority of states, or do other states offer these alternative driver's license that are valid from, let's say, 8 to 6 or whatever?
Right. There are a number of states that do provisional licenses, and again, New York is one of them. So that because they're right over the border, we hear that from a lot of folks that get a DUI in Vermont and live in Hoosick. They don't understand. So if you get a provisional license in New York, you're still going to be suspended from driving in Vermont. So if you live in Hoosick and work in Bennington, even if you get a provisional license in New York to drive, because you got the DUI in Vermont, it's going to prohibit you from driving here for 90 days. So it's a very complicated process, I would say. Now, the legislature has made some changes, which I think are important, and I'm glad that we're headed in this direction, which is the expungement and sealing that we've heard so much about. They have expanded sealing and expungement so that if you get a DUI, 15 years later, you can actually get that DUI sealed, so that the only individuals that would know you had that would be law enforcement. The legislature's been very focused on the number of criminal charges, the docket numbers in each county. But I can have a week where I have, maybe 35 arraignments, and 15 of them are for driving with no license. And so I refer all of the ones that I can to DLS Diversion, which is a program run by the Center for Restorative Justice that they help individuals get into. The state has various payment plans and commitments, contracts that you enter into so that you can pay down your fines and you get your license back. But they don't apply to the DUIs. So what I typically do in those cases is I'll tell the defendant, look, get your license back on the initial suspension from the DUI, and I'll dismiss the new DLS, because I don't want to see someone now again suspended. And so I think, and I do believe we've talked about the fact that there are some minimum sentences that are attached to driving with license suspended, and I believe some of that may, again, be tied to something with federal funding. So I think it is something that the legislature is probably going to start taking a closer look at, because they are concerned with the number of cases in criminal court, and there are a lot of DLSs in criminal court in every county.
We also spoke with Paul Doucette, the police chief of Bennington, to get his perspective.
So when a motor vehicle operator is stopped and we run their driver's license, they may come back suspended civilly or criminally. A civil suspension would mean that they would receive a Vermont civil violation for the offense. We would remove the vehicle from the public highway and move on to the next traffic stop. If you are suspended criminally in the state of Vermont for a major motor vehicle violation or for a multitude of different reasons, a criminal suspension means that you would be brought back to the Bennington Police Department. You would be fingerprinted, photographed, and issued a citation to appear in Superior Court Criminal Division to answer to the offense of operating while after suspension, criminal violation. Well, at this point in the state of Vermont, there is no privileged driver's license. If you are suspended criminally in the state of Vermont, you cannot operate a motor vehicle. There is no license that you can obtain that would allow you to drive back and forth to work, medical appointments, and things of that nature. Civil suspension is the same. There is nothing in place that would allow someone to operate a motor vehicle after they've been suspended civilly. However, we do have programs in place. People that have received Vermont civil violation complaints and have not been able to pay those fines can contact the Vermont Judicial Bureau, and they can go on a payment plan where they would have to pay $30 per month for each traffic ticket that they have received, and they would be able to keep their driver's license and be able to go to their appointments and go to work as long as they were paying the Vermont Judicial Bureau the $30 a month per ticket. That's something that we do refer many people to so that they can maintain their driver's license. As long as you make those payments, you are able to maintain your driver's license. On the criminal suspension, we do have programs in Vermont. For example, here in Bennington County, you can go through the Center for Restorative Justice, and they do have a DLS program where you can work with a member at CRJ and be able to go and see what it is that you need to do to have your driver's license reinstated. You can't drive during that time. However, they will guide you and give you assistance in making it so that you can be ready for when your license is ready to be reinstated in Vermont. So for example, if you have a motor vehicle conviction for DUI and you're suspended for 90 days and then you get a DLS and perhaps another DLS, you can go to CRJ and work with them to make sure that you have everything organized and ready to go so that when your suspension date is up, you can pay the reinstatement fee and regain your privilege to drive a vehicle in Vermont.
Is there some point where you kind of run out of chances? I mean, if you kind of make enough mistakes in a row, can you permanently lose a driver's license?
So there is a suspension called a life suspension in Vermont for major motor vehicle violations. People that get too many DUIs, for example, could lose their license for life. However, the way the laws are written in Vermont, that too can be corrected. When someone is involved in abstinence and stays away from alcohol and drugs and things like that. So just because they're suspended for life does not mean that they will not be able to drive later on. But there is a large gap. There's a large period of time that they have to wait. These are people that are habitual offenders and probably don't deserve to drive for a period of time in Vermont because they can't correct their behaviors. Driving in Vermont is a privilege, and that privilege can be suspended if you don't follow the rules of the road.
Mm-hmm. Is this a big issue down here in Bennington?
It is a big issue. I think back almost 30 years to when I started with the Bennington Police Department. Anytime you drove a vehicle and you were under suspension, it was a criminal offense. You were arrested, placed in wrist restraints, brought back to the office, fingerprinted, photographed. Paperwork would go to court, and you would have to appear in the criminal division. That doesn't work for everyone. They switched it so that only major motor vehicle violations you could make an arrest for, and then they gave you an opportunity. So for example, if you received a speeding ticket and you didn't pay that, your privilege to drive in Vermont would become suspended. Sometimes it was an oversight for some people. Sometimes it was that people just didn't have the money to pay that, so they would become criminally suspended. So 3 years down the road, they get stopped again for speeding, and come to find out their license is criminally suspended, so they would get arrested. So the state changed all that through legislation, and they made it so that you would receive a civil traffic ticket for operating after suspension. If you acquired 5, we called it an OSC violation, operating after suspension, civil. If you received 5 on the 6th time you were stopped, that would become a criminal violation. So for a period of time, we didn't see nearly as many criminal offenses for operating after suspension. They became civil. But then what we have realized is that these same people continue to drive after suspension, and they were receiving too many civil violations, and then it became criminal for them once again. So now we have other programs, as I've mentioned to you, where if you just simply can't figure out or you need assistance, CRJ and the DLS program will help you get your driver's license reinstated. But you have to be willing to do the work to get that privilege back.
The best way out is to probably not lose your license in the first place, although hindsight is too often 20/20. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.